Imagine like shelling out $25 for a premium IMAX ticket.
Right.
And then dropping, another frankly ridiculous $70 on a limited edition Trojan horse popcorn bucket.
Yeah. Which is just wild.
It's totally wild. So you sit down in the dark for this highly anticipated 3-hour epic. The lights dim, the massive screen lights up, the legendary heroes open their mouths to speak, and 10 minutes in, you realize you literally cannot hear a single word they are saying.
Yeah, that is the exact, just head-scratching reality millions of moviegoers are facing this weekend.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're unpacking the explosive reactions to Christopher Nolan's hyper-polarized, massive cinematic take on the Odyssey.
It really is a phenomenal contradiction to explore, isn't it?
It is. We're trying to figure out how a movie can be simultaneously hailed as a visionary triumph and, a completely frustrating, unintelligible mess.
Well, what we're looking at here is a fascinating case study in what happens when a modern auteur-like, a director who wields absolute, unquestioned artistic control over every frame, collides with a foundational myth.
A myth that's been around since, the 7th century?
Exactly. We're talking about a story that has existed in our collective human consciousness for thousands of years. When you have a filmmaker famous for bending the rules of cinema, taking on a story that essentially wrote the rules of Western storytelling, you are absolutely guaranteed to get friction.
Friction might be putting it mildly, honestly.
Fair enough.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore exactly why this specific film is generating such fierce, unyielding debate. We're going to unpack everything you need to know, skipping over the surface level noise.
Right. Getting to the actual mechanics of the controversy.
Exactly. We're looking at everything from a massive culture war over its cast to fundamental arguments about its technical execution and ultimately just how it handles the basic concept of telling a story.
So where do we start?
Let's start with the most visible flashpoint. Before anyone even bought one of those giant popcorn buckets, the internet was already on fire over the casting crucible.
Oh, yeah. That started months ago.
Right. And the uproar really comes down to a few very specific choices. So Lupita Nyong'o is cast as Helen of Troy.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Indian actor playing a prominent Greek lieutenant. And Elliot Page is playing a brand new character named Sinan, who reportedly goes to the Trojan War in place of the character Robert Pattinson was originally slated to play.
Which is a massive amount of change for purists of the original text to process.
Definitely.
If we objectively break down the core of the critics' arguments here, the frustration stems from a deep-seated desire for demographic and geographic authenticity.
The idea that this happened in a real place.
Precisely. The argument essentially posits that while the Odyssey is undoubtedly an epic fantasy featuring monsters and gods, it is a fantasy firmly grounded in a very specific, real-world geographical location and time period.
Right, the ancient Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
The argument being that real geographical locations in history have actual demographics that, make sense for that time.
Exactly that. So the critics argue that plucking characters from a specific localized mythology and casting actors from entirely different global demographics, it shatters the immersion for them.
I get that.
But there is a deeper psychology at play here, too. Humans develop intense parasocial relationships with their mythology. These stories are foundational to cultural identity.
And there was actually a really passionate open letter about this, right?
Yes, circulating in Greece, it expressed deep frustration over this casting. The sentiment was that Greek people didn't simply, evaporate after antiquity.
Right.
Their culture wasn't frozen in classical marble. The language wasn't extinguished. They are still here today.
So to see a huge movie, ignore that.
Exactly. For a massive Hollywood production to adapt their foundational national myth and include 0 actual Greek actors feels, to many in that demographic, like their heritage is being treated as an interchangeable aesthetic rather than a lived history.
I hear that, and it's a really powerful point about cultural ownership. But let me push back on this narrative of unprecedented outrage for a second.
Go for it.
Hollywood has a heavily documented decades-long history of doing exactly this, just usually in the opposite direction.
Oh, absolutely.
We've seen white actors play characters of color for generations.
Yeah.
Charlton Heston played Moses. John Wayne, literally the ultimate American cowboy, played Genghis Khan.
Right. Arguably one of the weirdest casting choices in history.
Totally.
Uh-huh.
So is this kind of historical and demographic inaccuracy really a new phenomenon that's quote-unquote ruining cinema? Or is it just that the pendulum of Hollywood casting has swung in a different direction and caught a different demographic off guard?
Well, that historical context is exactly what forms the foundation of the defense for the film's casting. The supporters of these choices argue that this is fundamentally a fantasy epic. It's not a historical documentary.
Right.
The primary goal of this film, they argue, isn't literal historical accuracy, but rather to communicate the underlying spirit of the original text. The themes of the Odyssey, like the deep, agonizing yearning for homecoming, the clash between stability and chaos, these are universal human experiences.
And if the movie conveys those emotions, defenders argue the physical demographics of the actors are entirely incidental.
Exactly. And there is also the argument that art, especially at this scale, is supposed to challenge us.
Yeah, to be subversive.
Right. It's a major pillar of the defense. By casting actors who actively disrupt the traditional Eurocentric mold of these mythical figures, the filmmaker is deliberately trying to provoke the audience.
To challenge preconceived notions about identity.
Yes, and who is allowed to participate in these universal human stories. Plus, we should probably add a layer of practical perspective regarding the sheer volume of the internet outrage here.
Oh, the screen time thing.
Yes. Helen of Troy, despite being the face that launched 1,000 ships, is reportedly only on screen for about 45 seconds.
45 seconds. I mean, people are fighting an endless digital culture war over less than a minute of screen time. It's wild.
It really is.
But let's follow that thread of subversion, because this desire by the director to reinvent the wheel, to challenge the audience's expectations, it doesn't just stop at the casting sheet.
No, it definitely doesn't.
It bleeds directly into the actual filmmaking and the technical choices. And that brings us to an entirely different set of frustrations that have nothing to do with the culture war.
And everything to do with how the movie actually sounds and feels to sit through.
Exactly. Let's talk about the technical turmoil.
The audio mixing is where this film truly tests its audience. It's a well-known hallmark of this particular director to play with sound in unconventional, often abrasive ways.
To put it mildly.
Right. But the overwhelming consensus is that the audio mixing here is aggressively heavy-handed to the point of detriment. Reviewers and audiences are noting that the Foley work is frequently mixed significantly louder than the dialogue.
And just so we're all on the same page, Foley work refers to the everyday sound effects added into a film during post-production.
Right.
So the clanking of armor, the crunching of footsteps, the roar of the wind, the environmental background noises.
Yes. Those environmental sounds are prioritized over the human voice. People are estimating they missed up to 40% of what the actual characters were saying.
40%.
It raises a massive structural issue. There's a glaring example of this in the film, the Cyclops cave sequence.
Yeah.
To make the environment feel incredibly authentic, to make you really feel like you are trapped in a giant claustrophobic stone cavern, massive reverb and echo were added to all the dialogue.
Which, I mean, sounds like a bold, immersive choice on paper.
On paper, it's a fascinating acoustic experiment. But in practice, sitting in a theater, it resulted in this overpowering, deafening ringing that completely drowned out the actors.
So you have characters screaming vital survival information.
In a life-or-death situation.
Yeah.
And the audience cannot decipher a single syllable of it.
That is so frustrating.
It is. But this audio controversy actually reveals a fascinating shift in modern media. We're seeing a move from a narrative-first era of filmmaking to an experiential-first era.
Meaning the experience matters more than the plot.
Exactly. This director doesn't view dialogue as the primary vehicle for the story anymore. He treats the human voice as just another instrument in the overarching orchestra.
Wow.
It's an aha moment for why some modern blockbusters feel so exhausting. They're prioritizing your nervous system over your comprehension.
Prioritizing the nervous system over comprehension is the perfect way to put it. You aren't experiencing a story. You are enduring an assault on your senses. And that experiential first approach bleeds right into the pacing. The movie is famously edited in this non-linear, hyper-fragmented style.
It's intense.
The best way I can describe the sensation is this. You know when you sit down to watch a highly serialized TV show, and right before the episode starts, they play that rapid-fire previously on recap?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's just 2-second clips of dramatic dialogue layered over a pulsing, stress-inducing music track.
The kind of editing designed purely to download information into your brain as fast as possible.
Yes. Imagine sitting in a massive theater and watching the first hour of a movie edited exactly like a TV recap.
That sounds exhausting.
There is constant music playing underneath every single second. There are no pauses for breath. There's no moment of silence for characters to just exist in a space together and process what is happening to them.
Right.
The scenes don't feel like fully realized scenes. They feel like disjointed fragments rushing you aggressively to the next plot point.
And what's genuinely tragic about that specific manic pacing is how it actively harms the character development.
Because you can't connect with them.
Exactly. You have top-tier actors here. Matt Damon as Odysseus, Anne Hathaway as Penelope, and by all accounts, they are pouring their souls into these roles.
I heard they were great.
They are. There is a deeply emotional farewell scene between them early on. But because the editing is so relentless, and because there's this constant subliminal music score driving the tempo forward without mercy,
It just ruins it.
the emotional core is completely hollowed out of their performances. If the actors aren't allowed the space to breathe on screen, the audience isn't allowed the space to feel anything for them.
And to make matters worse, this fragmented pacing actively assumes you already know the lore of the Odyssey.
Right, doesn't hold your hand.
At all. The movie just expects you to bring your own context to the theater. It drops you into these mythic situations and completely refuses to explain them. Imagine sitting there in the dark, surrounded by Dolby speakers, and having to pull your own phone out to Google who Calypso is, just so you can follow the plot.
Which people are doing.
Yes. The film introduces this sea nymph who manipulates Odysseus for years, but never actually stops to establish her identity, her motivations, or the rules of her power.
It's an incredibly dangerous assumption for a filmmaker to make, relying on the audience's prior classical education to fill in the narrative gaps of a 3-hour film.
Yeah.
It transforms the movie from a self-contained emotional journey into a really loud, visually stunning supplementary aid for a book you were supposed to have read in high school.
That is so true. And that reliance on the audience's prior knowledge doesn't just hurt the character development, it completely neuters the movie's action sequences.
Because the stakes aren't established.
Exactly. If you don't build up the lore of a monster, you can't build suspense when it attacks. And that brings us to the most confusing part of this film, the monsters, the mythic misfires, and to be fair, a few hidden highlights.
We have to talk about the action sequences.
We do, because for a 3-hour R-rated epic, the action sequences are taking a massive amount of heat for lacking one crucial cinematic ingredient, suspense. We are talking about a story famous for its terrifying trials, and yet the pacing is so rushed that no single obstacle seems to last longer than 4 minutes.
Which is structurally baffling. Their R rating inherently implies a level of visceral intensity, perhaps even horror, given the mythological creatures involved.
You would think so.
But if an encounter with a legendary monster is resolved in 4 minutes flat, you have completely bypassed the psychological buildup required to create fear or tension in the viewer.
Let's look at the prime example of this misfire, the Cyclops scene. I want to break down the sheer confusing logic of this sequence.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. So Odysseus and his men are trapped in the cave. The giant Cyclops comes in, moves a massive boulder to block the door, and then it completely ignores the intruders.
Right, it just goes about its business.
Yeah. Then it casually bends down, bites a guy's head off with zero fanfare, and lays down to go to sleep.
So naturally, the men decide to blind him while he sleeps.
They stab his eye. The Cyclops wakes up, stumbles around blindly, but somehow still manages to easily move the giant boulder out of the way, allowing the men to simply walk out.
And then the kicker.
Oh my gosh, yes. Once they're outside and completely free, Odysseus inexplicably shoots the already injured, no longer a threat, Cyclops in the eye again with an arrow.
And that prompts one of his men to yell a throwaway line about how he shouldn't have done that because the Cyclops is a son of Poseidon.
It's just a sequence of random, disconnected events.
Well, if we look at the director's underlying intent here, he is actively trying to subvert the standard Hollywood boss fight.
Okay, how so?
By having the Cyclops act so randomly and anticlimactically, he's trying to portray ancient violence not as a glorious choreographed battle, but as senseless, terrifying, and abruptly mundane.
He's showing that survival was just luck.
Exactly. He wants to show that survival in this era wasn't about heroism, it was chaotic luck. But the problem is, while that works brilliantly as an intellectual exercise in a film studies class,
It doesn't work in a theater.
no, it completely destroys the visceral, edge-of-your-seat suspense the audience paid to experience. It alienates the viewer's basic desire for a coherent, stakes-driven narrative.
And that absolute lack of psychological depth extends to the siren sequence as well.
Mm-hmm.
In the original myth, the siren song is this profound, agonizing psychological torture. It forces the listener to confront their deepest, darkest desires and their existential dread.
It's deeply psychological.
But in this adaptation, the film violently breaks the golden rule of Cineshow don't tell.
Right.
They tie Matt Damon to the mast, they put earwax in the crew's ears, and the only really creative thing they do is a technical audio trick.
The sound dropping out.
Yeah, the ambient sound drops out when the crew uses the earwax, leaving just the musical score. And later, when the Indian lieutenant takes the earwax out of his right ear, the sound comes back only in the right audio channel in the theater.
Which is a clever technical flourish, certainly. It plays with the medium.
But emotionally,
Yeah.
it gives us nothing. We see Odysseus screaming against the ropes, but we don't experience his torment.
No visuals of his mind breaking.
Exactly. We don't see what the sirens are making him see.
Yeah.
Afterwards, he just sits down with his crew and verbally explains his existential crisis to them. He just tells them he had a mental breakdown.
Right.
It reduces a mythic psychological trial to a dry exposition dump.
It does. But, we do have to look at the other side of the coin.
The silver linings.
Yes. Despite this clunky storytelling, there are moments where this grand subversive vision actually connects. It's vital to recognize when a bold swing pays off.
Okay, what worked for you?
Well, the standout sequence that critics and audiences alike are praising is the encounter with Circe the witch.
Oh, yes.
This is where the film's R rating and its dark ambition finally align beautifully. Rather than a magical, sparkly fantasy transformation where the men turn into animals in a puff of smoke, the film leans heavily into visceral body horror.
It sounds incredibly intense, like a Guillermo del Toro movie.
It is described as deeply unsettling. The witch physically contorts the men's faces. You see them writhing as their eyes disappear, and literal snouts physically push through their tearing skin.
Oh, wow.
It's gripping, it's horrifying, and it reminds you why this director is considered a visionary. When he successfully uses his technical prowess to ground the mythic in brutal physical reality, it's terrifying and wildly effective.
And it successfully sets up the third act, which universally seems to stick the landing.
Which is crucial.
It's a huge relief.
Yeah.
Because if you are asking an audience to endure a 3-hour, sensorially exhausting journey, you need an incredible payoff.
Absolutely.
And the triumph of the ending comes down to one of the most primal, satisfying storytelling devices in existence: dramatic irony.
And for those who might not know the exact term, dramatic irony is a storytelling mechanism where we, the audience, are handed a secret that the characters on screen do not know.
Right.
It creates instant, palpable psychological tension.
Yes. Odysseus finally returns to his home in Ithaca, but he is disguised as a filthy beggar. He sneaks into his own home. He intercepts an assassination plot against his son Telemachus and saves him. And you, the audience, get to sit there, watching the arrogant, cruel suitors treat this beggar like absolute garbage.
Knowing exactly who he is.
Exactly. Knowing the sheer violence of what he is about to do to them. The reveal when he finally sheds the disguise, strings his legendary bow, and fights the suitors is apparently incredibly cathartic.
This is exactly why audiences will endure a clunky, experimental narrative.
For the payoff.
Yes, for that deeply satisfying payoff where you hold all the cards and the villains are oblivious. It's a primal storytelling mechanism that temporarily transcends all the technical flaws, the deafening audio, and the editing missteps of the preceding 2 hours.
Yeah, it makes it worth it.
When the hero reclaims his home, it just resonates on a deeply human level.
So, synthesizing all of this, what does this mean for the big picture of cinema? We are looking at a film that sits at a very strange modern crossroads.
It really does.
On the commercial side, it is tracking to be an absolute massive financial hit. We are talking projections of an $80 to $100 million opening weekend, with the potential to gross up to $800 million globally.
Wow.
The marketing has saturated the culture.
So the commercial success seems completely insulated from the critical debate.
Exactly. But critically and culturally, it is a visual spectacle plagued by clunky, fragmented storytelling, deafening audio choices that actively bury the dialogue, and a culture war casting controversy that has people fighting in the digital aisles before the opening credits even roll.
I think to truly synthesize this deep dive, we have to realize that whether this film is viewed as a pretentious, incoherent misfire or a daring, subversive masterpiece depends entirely on what you, as the viewer, want out of your cinematic experience.
That's a great point.
Are you going to the theater looking for a faithful, grounded, emotionally resonant retelling of a classic myth with clear character arcs? Or are you looking for an auteur's wildly experimental, flawed, but technically audacious interpretation that prioritizes overwhelming your senses over holding your hand through a plot?
Yeah.
The film unapologetically offers the latter.
It definitely doesn't apologize for what it is. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder.
Great.
If a master filmmaker, someone at the absolute apex of the Hollywood hierarchy, builds a $70 million theme park ride, but intentionally forgets to turn on the lights so you can see the track.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Has the art of the modern blockbuster evolved into an experiential realm beyond our traditional understanding? Or have we just completely forgotten the basic rules of cinematic engineering?
Something to think about.
It is a question worth asking yourself the next time you step into the dark of a theater, popcorn in hand, waiting for the story to begin. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one.